Hey everybody, welcome to the Wednesday Western Roundup here. I'm making this video today for a few reasons. The first being, I've been watching a lot of Westerns recently because tonight on my channel, my special guest will be Mike's DVD and Blu-ray, who I've collaborated with before. Most of you guys know Mike. He is a huge fan of Westerns. He's really inspired me to check out a lot of Westerns, including some that I haven't heard of. So tonight's topic will be lesser known Westerns. So we're not doing John Wayne, John Ford, Jimmy Stewart, or like Westerns like the original Magnificent Seven. Today I'm going to talk about and review, give a little overview of the sequels of the Magnificent Seven. So it's possible one of these could make the list. I'm still honing down my top 5 lesser known Westerns. So make sure you tune in at 8 o'clock tonight for that live stream. You know, I plan on keeping Mike about an hour or so, even though Mike and I can talk. We can talk for days about movies. Last time we did Westerns and film noir. I wanted to narrow the focus a little bit this time. Let me mention another channel before I get into the reviews, and I've been putting off seeing these movies for years, just like Jeff from 101 Bronson. Now, recently on his channel, he unboxed a special German edition of all the Magnificent Seven films, including the sequels. Really cool to see that. It was kind of like a limited edition. So for physical media fans, check that out because you're going to see something that you're probably not going to see anywhere else. And he had mentioned that he's just like me. Like, he's known about the sequels, but he's just never really gotten around to watching them. I'm interested to hear his thoughts when he does. Yeah, you start reading about the sequels, pretty much a lot of people put them in the same basket as lesser sequels. I mean, how are you going to compete with the original Magnificent Seven from 1960? A lightning in a bottle type film that had just happened to co-star so many stars who were on the way up. Yul Brynner, Steve McQueen, Charles Bronson, Robert Vaughn. It's just pretty incredible. James Coburn. Eli Wallach as the villain. You gotta have a good villain in these. We'll get to that in a moment. So the sequels, it's just going to be hard to capture that. But I find them to be. There's some surprises to be had when you get into the sequels. First thing, the casting choices alone for me are worth watching. I'm just very interested to see who they cast in these roles. Some of them are returning characters. Many of them, of course, are new characters since. Spoiler alert, not really. But as you may have guessed in this type of film, in the original Magnificent Seven, not everybody survives. Anyway, one character that does survive is Yul Brynner's Chris. So he does return for the Return of the Seven. That's what it's called, in 1966. The original was in 1960. This is in 1966. That's 6 years. That's a decent amount of time. He is basically, now this one was filmed in Spain. So you got some bullfighting, some flamenco dancing, even though I'm not sure they have flamenco dancing in Mexico. I know they have bullfighting in Mexico. So it works, And as a matter of fact, it opens up at a bullfight. Chris is watching a bullfight. A couple things happen. Number one, the character of Vin sidles up next to him and says, "Hey, I'm supposed to collect a reward for you," but they kind of laugh it off because they're old friends. Now, Vin is the character played by Steve McQueen from the original. And famously, the two of them, Brynner and McQueen, did not get along filming. Brynner thought that McQueen was trying to steal scenes. If you watch the film, it's kind of fun to look for that because you can kind of see it. He's moving around a lot every time Brenner's talking. So Robert Fuller plays that character, and he does a pretty good job. I mean, do you try to do a carbon copy of McQueen's performance, or do you kind of make it your own? And I think he does a pretty good job. As the film went on, I kind of got used to it. The other thing that happens is a young guy just jumps into the bullfighting arena and wants to take over the bullfight. And the Matador's like, "Be my guest. It's your funeral." Well, not surprisingly, he's going to become one of the seven. Okay. And then you also have, I believe that was Jordan Christopher playing Manuel. So you've got Brynner, Robert Fuller, and then another character that returns is Chico, who was played by Horst Buchholz in the original. The sort of the young Mexican from the village that they were actually defending. Well, time is going on now. He's a little more mature. He's got a wife named Petra, and the village seems to be doing okay. We'll get to that in a moment. But they have kind of an uneasy truce with a Mexican general played by Emilio Fernandez, who many of you know as Mapache from The Wild Bunch. I just mentioned him the other day when Alucard and I were watching a movie that had his one-time wife Columba Dominguez in it. Anyway, yeah, you recognize this guy. He was like a huge director and star, probably like one of the foremost directors and actors of Mexican cinema in the 20th century. So he's kind of like the military guy, and then there's another guy, and I guess maybe I didn't pick up on this, but I think he's supposed to be a rancher, played by Rudolfo Acosta, or you'll recognize that face too, who wants to move in on this village, creating another conflict. But let me get to the rest of the 7. So Brenner agrees to help Chico once again, and they recruit Warren Oates, Claude Akins, Jordan Christopher, who I mentioned, and Virgilio Teixeira, who is actually a Portuguese actor. But he's playing a Mexican in this film, and it's a pretty good cast. And the movie moves along. If you go back to a lot of these types of films, The Seven Samurai, which pretty much started this whole sort of subgenre, to include the American remake, The Magnificent Seven, and other films that it inspired, like Beach of the War Gods with Jimmy Wang Yu. A bunch of strangers coming together to defend a village. Fort of Death in the Bounty Hunter trilogy. They're all different characters. A lot of times it'll take a while to introduce each character. Well, they kind of speed things up a little bit. Claude Akins apparently knows Chris from before. And after he recruits him, they see Warren Oates jump out of a window, chased by an angry husband. He's apparently just, kind of horny. I don't know. That's his sort of motivation in the film. He's, wants to side up next to some Mexican village women, kind of the way that Brad Dexter's character just didn't believe in the first film that they were actually just doing this for money, and not a lot of money. He thought there must be some hidden gold or something. Warren Oates is kind of like that character here. As a matter of fact, I would have liked to maybe swapped in Warren Oates or Claude Akins for the Brad Dexter character in the original Magnificent Seven. I mean, he's the one that a lot of people are like, who's the seventh guy again? Harry, I think his character's name was. Oates was pretty young though in this, and this was 6 years later, so that might not have been feasible, but just hypothetically, Oates or Akins. Claude Akins is always good in these roles. I mean, he's just very good. And that's it. There's some kind of setbacks. I mentioned 3 characters come back from the first one. Well, there's not 3 at the end of the film. And I don't remember every little bit of it, to be honest. Okay, and there's a little bit of sloppiness in some parts. Let's be real. In the beginning, when that kid jumps in to fight the bull, they have a shot where he's supposed to give the bull the coup de grace, and then when they have a wide shot, he's just standing there with no bull. It's like, what did he vaporize it? The action scenes are pretty good. Brenner, he had so much gravitas. After appearing in a few Western roles, especially The Magnificent Seven, he was just perfect for Westworld. You know what I mean? He just couldn't imagine anyone else doing that. He's just so freaking scary. I mean, the guy could read the phone book and he could make it interesting, but he does seem maybe a little bit disinterested overall. He's still good because he's Yul Brynner, but this one was okay. It felt very much like, hey, let's make a sequel. Apparently McQueen was interested at one time, but then didn't really like the plot. And I can kind of see that, and I'm quite sure Brenner was like, good. He wasn't going to do it again if McQueen was in it, that's for sure. All right, let's get to the next one. Then you had Guns of the Magnificent Seven, 1969. Now, no returning cast members. The Chris character comes back, but now it's George Kennedy, which kind of seems like an odd choice. Kennedy, for me, is more like the sidekick character, like a Claude Akins type of actor who's like the number 2 guy or that reliable guy in the 7. But he's playing Chris here. And why is he playing Chris? Well, if you look at the poster, it says featuring Academy Award winner George Kennedy from, and then it'll say Cool Hand Luke. So he was riding high at this moment in time. And I'll tell you what, he sold it for me. By the end of it, I was all in on George Kennedy in this role. And his Chris, because he's been around the world a few times and he's seen some stuff or been around the Old West. but he actually gets shaken up in this, and Kennedy is very good. You have this time a revolutionary type figure named Quintero is kidnapped. He's played by Fernando Rey, who, by the way, was also in Return of the Seven as a priest. And he's kidnapped by a very ruthless villain, Colonel Diego, played by Michael Ansara. Okay, and this is one of the things that makes this film better than Return of the Seven, is you have a really solid villain. Michael Ansara, of course, has a pretty strong Western pedigree, oftentimes playing a Mexican or a native character. He was actually Syrian, but very reliable actor. He was in Law of the Plainsman, which is a rifleman spinoff. And he's a son of a bitch in this movie. At one point, he will capture a bunch of rebels and bury them up to their heads. And he threatens them with horses circling around them. And by the way, Return of the Seven and this film are rated G. Okay. Since I mentioned it, I'll just get to it. Kennedy has kind of an uneasy relationship with him at first, because he basically says, "Oh, I'm just looking for silver. Me and my boys here just looking for silver. Oh, there's no silver to be had in these hills, senor." But they're kind of suspicious of him. But they sidle up next to this fort, and Kennedy comes in because he says he wants to get some water. And Colonel Diego's like, "Oh, okay. You're getting some water, huh? I'm going to show you a little something." So he shows them what he does to these guys. And the camera cuts away from it, but Kennedy's reaction is like, "Oh my gosh, you see all this dust? Thank goodness," because it made me nervous. Even before they started, just seeing the horse walk between the guys buried up to their heads. Oh, I've been watching a lot of Westerns lately. I've seen some collisions and some things happen in these films that clearly were not intended. I've seen people get trampled. Horses collide with each other. My gosh, that's why Clint Eastwood was like such a soft-spoken director, because he knew you can't be yelling around horses. You startle them and they do things. That made me nervous. But then in the movie, these guys that are buried up to their necks, something happens and George Kennedy's shaken. And to be honest, so was I. And it's rated G. I was like, what the hell? How is this rated G? So, the rest of the cast. Okay, you've got, I jumped ahead a little bit, Bernie Casey, okay, looking very physically fit. Renny Santoni from Dirty Harry, very solid actor. He plays a Mexican character in this. Scott Thomas as PJ. James Whitmore, who was not super old, but kind of looked old, so he's playing an older character. And Monty Markham as Keno. Monty Markham is sort of a very good right-hand man in this role. He's just something about him. He's very good. James Whitmore is obviously up there in your. He's good with a knife. He's got a young bride, but he agrees to go along. So Bernie Casey, we find him, and this one's a little bit longer than the other one, so they do take a little more time to build up these characters, and all of them register in this film. Okay, they all register. Bernie Casey works in a mine. He's very good with dynamite. You see him rescue someone in the beginning, but the foreman is still angry. You wasted time saving someone's life, and he uses a slur, which doesn't go over well with Bernie Casey. So George Kennedy rides up just as, he saves this guy's life, and because of the times, Bernie Casey probably would have paid dearly for that. Eventually, he'll get into a sort of a friendship of sorts with Joe Don Baker, who makes the mistake of using some kind of a slur after they first meet. So that's nearly almost a fight, but they eventually will begin to respect each other. Joe Don Baker plays a character who's in a Wild West show as, I think it's Buffalo. It's not Buffalo Bill. It's like Buffalo Ben. I think it's Buffalo Ben. And there's some guy in the crowd's like, "Buffalo Ben? What is this?" And he does a trick shot. He lines the guy up, and you barely even see him draw, and he shoots behind his back. So he's an excellent shot. But when Kennedy goes up and hugs him, he pulls back because the guy's got one arm that has now been damaged. So it's been limp. So it's completely limp. So he's a good character. Joe Don Baker's good in this. The relationship between him and Bernie Casey, whose skills with explosives are needed for the final assault, are very good. And then you have Scott Thomas, plays a character named PJ. He just kind of sidles up as Kennedy's sort of trying to round out the seven and says, "Hey, this is one of those meetings where they just kind of shorten it." He's like, "Hey, remember me, old friend? Can I join?" And that's what happens. And Kennedy's like, "Are you sure you're up to this?" Because he begins hacking. He's got this hacking cough. I think his character was a little bit inspired by Doc Holliday. So he's got something along the lines of tuberculosis, something like that, if not tuberculosis. So he's just like, what the hell? Let me have one last adventure. He's really good in this, and it looks like his career was about 20 years long, from late 60s to late 80s. Just lots of TV, but he's really good in this. And the fort itself is cool. I mean, this is a good set. They got a tower with a Gatling gun, and it's just a very good set. This is a pretty good-looking film overall, for sure. I think they might have put a little more effort behind this one, and we're really trying to ride that Academy Award that George Kennedy got to make this one more of a hit, and it shows. And it's really good. The plan itself is really cool. They're not reinventing the wheel, perhaps, but it's very entertaining. And like I said, Michael Ansara is a great villain. So this one really surprised me, especially after the first one. Okay. Then, equally surprising in different ways, is the final one, The Magnificent Seven Ride from 72. Now, Guns of the Magnificent Seven was 69. This is from 72. In the first 5 minutes, to me, it felt like we were in a completely different era of filmmaking. Everything, the way the credits looked, you start seeing the credits, people like Gary Busey, Ed Lauder, James B. Seeking. I'm sure they had other roles before this, but they're pretty young, and it just seems like much more of a modern film, and it just has that kind of a feel. This one was apparently filmed completely within the United States, so they kind of have some scenes that are supposed to be set in Mexico, but it was all in the United States. And Lee Van Cleef comes back as Chris this time. So Chris is a lawman now, and he's got a wife, somewhat young wife, and he just wants to keep order. And there's actually some pretty interesting, almost like side plots before we get to the final conflict. But as a whole movie, you almost wonder why they kind of went this way and that way. He's got a conflict in the beginning. He's got a young kid who robbed a store, and I forget if he burned it or something, and his mom's in there pleading for mercy, and he's just, Chris is just like, no, sorry. He cost that shopkeeper a year of his life in terms of salary, sorry, when you break the law, that's it. And his young wife is like, well, maybe we could have mercy. Well, he does, and then this guy hooks up with a couple local thugs, one of whom is Gary Busey, and they do something bad, and Chris pays a personal price. Remember, he's got a young wife. I'm not going to go into detail. But this one is rated PG, and there's lots of hints of assault, okay, of that nature. Assault on females in this film. They describe it, and you see the aftermath of it. So, in a few different scenes. So I'm sure that's why this one got a PG. So Chris is, eventually he, there's another sort of Mexican outlaw type figure. At one point in the beginning, Chris ran into his old friend, Mackie, played by Ralph Waite, and he kind of gets Mackie out of this jam, and Mackie kind of gives him the lay of the land. He's a character who's there to explain everything. Oh, this guy's trying to take over this farming territory. It's not the same village or anything like that. It's a different village this time, I think. But then he doesn't last. And Ralph Waite would have been a great addition to the Seven. He would have been one of the really good, like the Kino character from the Guns of the Seven. He would have been like the good number 2 guy, but he doesn't last. There's a bunch of characters in this movie that aren't in the Seven. By the time they get to it, it's the Seven in a village with mostly women who join in and help this time a lot more than usual. Pulling the trigger, not just like, making goo-goo eyes at one of the Seven and, that kind of thing. Attending to their wounds. And Stephanie Powers is in this, so some of the female roles are pretty good. But it's just pretty much a retread of the ending of the first one. The plan, I guess, is pretty cool. They kind of go out away from the village and try to have waves, lines of defense. We're going to have the Winchester rifles here, and then we're going to pull back. Going to make some fighting positions. I guess it's okay. They name the villain, but you never meet him. So he just, at the end, during the final attack, a guy shows up, and he's the head bad guy because he's got a scar on his face. Other than that, he's not really like a character. He's just almost like a figurehead, I'll just tell you who the Seven are. You got Luke Askew, Michael Callan, who started following the Chris character in the beginning because he's a reporter and he wants to, know more about his life story. He comes along and eventually straps on a gun. Ed Lauter, William Lucking, who played Piney on Sons of Anarchy. Apparently, he was in quite a few westerns back in the day. I did not know that, but he's pretty good. He's pretty strong. And James B. Seeking is a guy that has former military experience, so he's good for talking about tactics and strategy. Oh, by the way, there's a whole plot about getting a lot of these guys out of jail. Okay. Oh, and also Pedro Amarendírez Jr., who was in a number of westerns. I know Mike from Mike's DVD and Blu-ray just showed off one with Burt Lancaster. I think he was like the second lead guy in that one. So there's a whole subplot about getting these guys out of jail. And of course, Chris has a relationship. Chris put some of them in jail, so they're not like old friends or anything. So there's that kind of dynamic. It's just pretty good. It's okay. Lee Van Cleef as Chris might be the best part. It's just, I don't know. It's okay. There's a couple scenes that are just a little almost like perfunctory. I mean, there's one, I guess, William Lucking's character is supposed to be really strong. He comes up behind one guy and chokes him. I mean, I don't know how strong this guy is, but it lasted about 2 seconds. I'm dead. It's like, okay, I don't know. It was pretty good overall, but just like it felt like it was definitely a little bit too late. Maybe if they started with these sequels a couple years after the original Magnificent Seven, they would have been better. But then again, the second one, they would not have had George Kennedy because, like I said, they were capitalizing on his Oscar-winning role. Let's just rank them real quick. Nothing is going to touch the Magnificent Seven in terms of sequels. I mean, the Magnificent Seven is number one. That's pretty much obvious. I would go number two for me. Not even a question. It's the second one, Guns of the Magnificent Seven with George Kennedy. That's the one I found just the most original, the most fun, the most cinematic. Really like that one. Good characters all around. It's almost hard for me to come up with to rank the next two, the ones that would be 2 and 3, or I guess 3 and 4 if we're counting the first one. Toss up. I'm going to go with the first one, the Return of the Seven that had Brenner, the one that had Yul Brenner coming back. I mean, I guess Warren Oates, Claude Akins, just tips the scale for me, I guess. And then the fourth one, of course, would be the last one, the Magnificent Seven Ride, which really kind of felt like, I mean, I bet people walked out of the theater going, okay, that's it for this series. I hope, we don't need to make another one of these. It wasn't that bad, but it wasn't that good. It wasn't good enough to say, hey, I can't wait for another one. The time era seemed to have moved on, I guess is what I'm saying. So there you go, guys. What are your thoughts about any of these sequels? This is a Warner Brothers set I've got here. Blu-ray set. Each film has its own Blu-ray. Not too shabby at all. It's kind of cool. If you pause the film, they show the timestamp, but there's like little bullet holes in it. So there's some nice little touches. As far as extras, it looks like essentially there's just trailers. To be 100% honest, I may not have explored the whole set. But check out the 101 Bronson channel for his unboxing of a German edition of the Magnificent Seven and its sequels. And tonight at 8, come back to my channel for my conversation with Mike's DVD and Blu-rays about our favorite underseen and underappreciated Westerns. Or if you're seeing this in the future, come back again for some more Western Wednesdays and check out Mike's channel and check out that live stream. Okay. Thanks.